What if the unrest in your home did not begin at the center, but at the edges you never thought to guard? What if the instruction you almost ignored was not symbolic at all, but a quiet act of preparation before everything shifts? This is not about objects, dates, or rituals. It is about obedience, alignment, and authority at the gateways of your life. Because before change arrives, heaven always restores order, and the houses that listen early are the ones that stand unshaken when the movement begins. Windows are never just glass set in a wall. They are silent witnesses. They stand at the edge between worlds, between what is contained and what is permitted, between the private sanctuary of a household and the unseen currents pressing in from the outside. Long before they were architectural features, windows were spiritual symbols. They were gateways, and every gateway speaks of authority. What a house allows through its windows reveals more than taste or preference. It reveals governance, because whatever enters shapes the atmosphere, and whatever exits carries the essence of what dwells within. Light enters through windows, but so do shadows. Air passes through them, but so do whispers, influences, distractions, and unseen pressures. A window is a point of exchange. It decides what is welcome, what is filtered, and what is refused. Throughout sacred patterns, gateways were never neutral. Cities fell when gates were compromised. Homes suffered when openings were left unguarded. And the window, though quiet and often overlooked, is one of the most powerful borders a dwelling possesses. It is where vision is formed. What a household looks at repeatedly begins to shape what it believes. What it tolerates visually slowly settles into thought, then into atmosphere, then into identity. To address the windows is to reclaim authority that may have been surrendered without realizing it. It is a declaration that the household will no longer be governed by whatever happens to pass by, whatever happens to be visible, whatever happens to be accessible. It is the moment when a house says, we will decide what enters here. We will decide what leaves here. We will no longer live porous to chaos, fear, confusion, or intrusion. Atmosphere does not happen by accident. It is formed. And windows are among its primary regulators. A home filled with unrest often did not begin with turmoil at the center, but with unguarded access at the edges. Influence rarely storms in through walls. It drifts in through openings, quietly, gradually, almost unnoticed, until it settles and demands attention. Reclaiming authority over windows is not about control born of fear. It is about stewardship born of responsibility, because every household carries an assignment, and every assignment requires boundaries. When the borders are undefined, the mission weakens. When the gateways are governed, clarity returns. Peace begins to hold its ground. The house shifts from reaction to intention. Windows also determine what a house releases. A home filled with tension sends tension outward. A home filled with fear transmits fear. But when authority is restored, what flows out changes. Peace becomes the export. Stability becomes the residue. Others feel it without knowing why, because governed gateways produce governed outcomes. This is why addressing windows is so profound. It is not cosmetic. It is prophetic. It is the act of standing at the threshold and saying, this dwelling will no longer be shaped by random influence. It will be shaped by purpose. It will no longer absorb without discernment or release without intention. It will stand as a place where light enters clean, where vision remains clear, and where atmosphere is protected. When authority is restored at the gateway, the entire house feels it. And what once slipped in uninvited no longer finds permission to stay. The instruction is not about the object in the hand, because heaven has never been moved by materials. Stone never impressed God. Wood never persuaded him. Fabric never convinced him. What moves heaven has always been obedience. And this is the tension that runs through every divine instruction. The act looks small, even insignificant, yet the weight behind it is eternal. Protection is never activated by ritual alone. Ritual without alignment becomes empty motion. Emotion without obedience becomes noise. Understanding without surrender becomes delay. Heaven does not respond to how strongly something is felt, how passionately it is performed, or how well it is explained. Heaven responds to order, to alignment, to obedience that positions a person, a household, or a people beneath divine covering throughout sacred history. Protection followed alignment, not comprehension. The people who were spared were not the ones who understood the plan most clearly, but the ones who obeyed it most fully. They did not always know why the instruction was given. They simply knew who gave it, and that distinction made all the difference. Because obedience does not require clarity. It requires trust. This is why the instruction strips away reliance on emotion. Feelings fluctuate. Fear rises and falls. Confidence comes and goes. But obedience stands when emotion fades. It is steady. It is deliberate. It is a choice made not in response to pressure, but in submission to authority. And when obedience is present, protection follows as a legal response of heaven, not as a favor, not as a mood, but as an established order. Covering is not begged for. It is entered into. It is activated when a life or a household aligns itself with divine instruction. And alignment is not agreement in theory, it is agreement in action. The moment obedience is expressed, the unseen shifts. Not because God needed the act, because the act positioned the person under his governance. Ritual tries to control outcomes. Obedience relinquishes control. Ritual asks what will happen if I do this. Obedience says I will do this because it was spoken. And heaven recognizes that posture instantly. Because obedience restores rightful authority. It transfers governance from human reasoning to divine order. Protection is never random. It is never accidental. It follows alignment the way shadow follows substance. When alignment is present, protection is not forced. It is released. When alignment is absent, protection is resisted, even when prayed for desperately. This is why many seek covering but remain exposed. They want safety without surrender, peace without alignment, security without obedience. Understanding often comes after obedience, not before it. Those who wait to understand before acting often wait too long, but those who act before understanding step into covering before explanation, and in that covering, clarity eventually arrives, because obedience opens doors that knowledge alone cannot. This instruction reveals a deep truth, that divine protection is not activated by what is held, displayed, or performed, but by the alignment of the heart and the will. The object is not the source, the obedience is. And when obedience is present, heaven responds with order, with covering, with authority restored. Because in the unseen realm, obedience speaks louder than fear, louder than logic, louder than ritual. It is the language heaven has always answered. To mark every window is to confront a truth most would rather avoid. That alignment cannot be partial. That obedience cannot be selective. That surrender cannot be negotiated. Because the unseen realm does not respond to intentions that stop halfway. It responds to alignment that is complete. A single unmarked window is not just an oversight. It is a statement. It says some areas are yielded and some are reserved. Some entrances are governed and some are left to chance. And chance is never neutral. What is not surrendered is still exposed. What is not aligned still invites intrusion. And what is left unmanaged becomes the very place where unrest enters quietly and settles without resistance. History reveals this pattern again and again. Protection failed not because obedience was absent, but because it was incomplete. The instruction was heard, but not fully carried out. The boundary was established, but not all the way around. And the breach did not come through the guarded places. It came through the gap. Always the gap. Selective boundaries feel reasonable. They feel controlled. They allow a sense of autonomy while still appearing obedient. But heaven does not measure obedience by appearance. It measures it by wholeness. Because partial obedience still leaves authority divided. And divided authority produces instability. A house cannot rest when some entrances are governed by divine order and others by human discretion. Every window represents a line of sight, a channel of influence, a point of exchange. To mark some and not others is to declare that some areas of life require divine governance while others do not. And that declaration, whether intentional or not, fractures alignment. It creates inconsistency, and inconsistency is the enemy of peace. Full surrender, however, changes everything. When every window is addressed, the message becomes unmistakable. Nothing is exempt, nothing is withheld, nothing is left unmanaged. The household stands in agreement, not partially, but completely. And that completeness creates rest, because peace is not the absence of trouble, it is the presence of order. Stability does not come from strengthening the center while neglecting the edges. It comes from securing the borders so the center can remain undisturbed. A house with guarded openings does not live in constant reaction. It lives in quiet authority. It does not scramble to respond to every intrusion, because intrusion no longer has permission to enter. This is why complete alignment produces lasting peace rather than temporary relief. Partial obedience may bring moments of calm, but unrest eventually returns through the unguarded place. Full surrender, however, establishes consistency. And consistency creates predictability in the spirit. The unseen recognizes a house that has no gaps. When every window is marked, the house becomes whole, not divided between trust and control, not split between faith and fear. It stands unified, and unity is strength. Unity is stability. Unity is what allows a household to rest without vigilance turning into anxiety. Lasting peace is not emotional. It is structural. It is built on alignment that does not fluctuate. And stability is not fragile when every boundary is honored. The house no longer sways with every external pressure because its governance is settled. Marking every window is the quiet declaration that surrender has reached its final depth, that no area remains negotiable, that obedience is no longer selective. And when that line is drawn fully, peace does not need to be chased. It takes its place naturally, because full alignment does not invite peace. It establishes it. The act is not passive. It is not symbolic decoration. It is discernment made visible. A line drawn where influence once crossed freely. Because discernment is not merely knowing the difference between right and wrong. It is choosing what is permitted to remain, what is allowed to enter, and what must be turned away at the threshold before it ever reaches the center. Every household is shaped by what it sees. Vision forms thought. Thought shapes atmosphere. Atmosphere governs direction. What a home looks upon repeatedly begins to define what it expects, what it tolerates, and eventually what it becomes. And windows are the primary instruments of sight. They frame the world for the household. They decide what is brought near and what is key. PT at a distance. To govern the window is to govern the gaze. And to govern the gaze is to reclaim authority over the inner life of the home. Because many battles are not fought at the center of the house. They are introduced quietly through what is watched, absorbed, and normalized at the edges. Discernment interrupts this process. It refuses to allow everything visible to become everything permissible. Distinction is the companion of discernment. It is the courage to separate what builds from what erodes, what aligns from what distracts, what nourishes from what drains. Distinction does not isolate a household from the world, but it filters the world before it enters. It understands that not every influence deserves access, and not every voice deserves a hearing. When a household governs what it receives, it begins to change what it reflects. Because reflection is inevitable. What fills a home eventually flows out of it. A home saturated with unrest releases unrest. A home governed by fear transmits fear. But a home guided by discernment releases peace, clarity, and steadiness without effort. This is how a house becomes a refuge rather than a reaction chamber. Reaction responds after disruption has already entered. Refuge prevents disruption from settling in the first place. Reaction scrambles to manage chaos. Refuge rests in authority, and authority is not loud. It is calm. It is steady. It is recognized without announcement. Clarity emerges when discernment is practic, consistently. Confusion loses its footing. Noise loses its power. The household no longer reacts to every external shift because it has already decided what matters. What aligns is welcomed. What does not is dismissed without drama. And this clarity reshapes atmosphere. authority follows distinction. Because authority is not asserted, it is established. The unseen recognizes a house that governs its openings. Influence hesitates where boundaries are clear. Pressure retreats where permission is absent, and what once lingered finds no place to stay. This transformation is subtle but profound. The home does not become hardened, it becomes ordered. It does not become closed, it becomes intentional. And in that intention, peace settles. Not as a fragile feeling, but as a sustained condition. A household that practices discernment no longer lives on edge. It lives anchored. It no longer absorbs everything it encounters. It selects, it filters, it governs. And in doing so, it becomes a place of clarity in a world of noise, a place of refuge in a climate of unrest, a place of authority in an age of reaction. This is the power of discernment made visible. Not retreating from the world, but standing within it, governed, watchful, and unshaken. The instruction does not arrive with urgency or alarm. It comes quietly, almost unnoticed, like a whisper before the ground begins to shift. Because true preparation is rarely loud. It does not announce what is coming. It readies what must stand when it does. And this is how heaven has always prepared its people. Not by revealing every detail of the future, but by restoring order before movement begins. Change without preparation produces panic. Transition without order produces fracture. But when order is restored first, movement unfolds with strength rather than strain. This instruction is not about reacting to what is ahead. It is about being positioned before it arrives. Because heaven never moves a household forward without first stabilizing its foundations. Throughout sacred patterns, preparation always preceded transition. Before the rain fell, the ark was ordered. Before famine struck, storehouses were aligned. Before deliverance came, thresholds were marked. Preparation did not eliminate the storm. It ensured survival within it. And the preparation often looked unnecessary until it became essential. This instruction follows that same ancient rhythm. It does not explain what is coming. It simply prepares the house to endure it. It restores order where drift may have settled, structure where neglect may have crept in, and alignment where familiarity may have replaced attentiveness. Because disorder weakens resilience, order strengthens it. Readiness is not haste, it is calm. It is the absence of panic before change. A prepared household does not scramble when circumstances shift. It adjusts, it does not react emotionally. It responds intentionally. And this is why preparation brings peace even before anything changes, because readiness removes the fear of the unknown. Resilience is built quietly. It is not forged in crisis, but before it. A house that is ordered at its edges does not crack at its center. When pressure comes, it absorbs rather than collapses. And this resilience is not born of toughness, but of alignment. Because aligned structures bear weight better than improvised ones. Calm is the fruit of preparation, not the calm of denial, but the calm of trust. A household that has responded to instruction does not need constant reassurance. It rests in the knowledge that guidance was given early, and early guidance is a sign of care, not threat. Heaven prepares what it intends to preserve. This instruction quietly signals movement ahead, not necessarily physical relocation, but a shift in season, responsibility, assignment, or direction. And the house is being readied not to resist that movement, but to move with it. Because unprepared houses cling to the familiar. Prepared houses recognize the moment. Order is restored first because order is what carries change safely. Without order, transition becomes chaos. With order, it becomes advancement. This is why the instruction does not rush the household forward. It steadies it, it strengthens it, it grounds it. And when the moment arrives, the house will not be startled. It will not be shaken. It will recognize the shift because it was already positioned for it. This is the mercy of preparation. It turns the unknown into assignment and the future into something that can be met without fear. What feels small now will prove foundational later, because preparation always looks quiet at the beginning, but when change comes, it reveals its weight. And the household that listened will stand ready, resilient, and calm, not because it knew what was coming, but because it trusted the instruction that came before it